So we were saying that in our fellowship, we must begin with the vertical, which is fellowship with God, and then horizontal. So if we ask ourselves this question, when fellowship is broken between us and another person, say between a husband and a wife, something has happened. That can happen in this world, you know. Sometimes it's only a misunderstanding. Nothing serious, but some little misunderstanding which the devil created. And the question is, who is to take the first step to restore that fellowship? I don't know whether you husbands and wives have encountered that problem. If you've been married more than 2 days, I'm sure you've encountered that problem. Who is going to take the first step? And I say the answer is, you look at God. When God and us had a broken fellowship, who took the first step? It was God. Why? Because He was more spiritual. So when a husband and wife have a tension, who should take the first step? The one who is more spiritual. But since both think they are more spiritual, they should be just running into each other's arms. Is there anybody who thinks you're less spiritual than your partner? It's very difficult to find someone who, particularly when there's a misunderstanding, each person thinks I'm more spiritual. Then you should be the first one to take the step. That's following the Lord. The other thing we can learn in our relationship with one another is, how did God restore His fellowship with us? There had to be a cross on which He died. Without that, our fellowship could never have been restored. I see that as a principle that when Jesus wanted to have fellowship with me, He said, I have to die on the cross, and then that fellowship can be restored. Because fellowship was broken in the Garden of Eden. And if you turn back there, I want to show you something. You know, there was a tree of knowledge of life, of good and evil, and a tree of life. What do you think that tree of life symbolized? The interpretation of the tree of life. What did the tree of life symbolize? Is given to us in 2 Corinthians and chapter 11. So there are a lot of things in the Old Testament which have a spiritual meaning. And the meaning is found somewhere in the New Testament. For example, I'll give you this example first. God said let there be light. It's way back in Genesis 1. That's explained in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 6. That's a picture of Christ coming into our life. God says to our dark hearts, let there be light. Christ comes into our life. In 2 Corinthians 4, 6, it says that God, who said, let the light shine out of darkness, has put the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ in our hearts. So that's just one example. So in the same way, 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 3, it says here, Paul says, I am afraid like the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness. Your minds should be led astray. What was Eve led astray from? Astray from the tree of life to somewhere else. Your mind can be led astray from, what is the tree of life? Simple, pure devotion to Jesus Christ. That is the tree of life. A relationship with Jesus of love. When the devil leads us astray from that to anything else, you know you've gone astray. That's what the devil led Eve astray from. He says, I'm afraid that the devil will lead you astray, just like he led Eve astray, into knowledge. It's a great temptation for us to acquire knowledge. And Adam and Eve went into the garden. They didn't go for life, they went for knowledge. And I have found through all these years, whenever we have a question-answer time, I've had that, by the way, there are about 600 questions and answers in our CFC website. A lot of your questions you'll find an answer to there, if you look for it. And I have found in many question-answer sessions I've had in many, many countries, many churches, by looking at the questions I know, is this related to life or knowledge? And in most cases, it is knowledge. What does this verse mean? What does that verse mean? What is this other thing? It's not related to how can I overcome this bad habit? How can I have more spiritual life? See, man's tendency is to look for knowledge. Even when you go to the Bible to get knowledge, it doesn't help us. It brings death. Always it brings death. Adam went after knowledge and he got death. So be careful. Go after life, which is simple, pure devotion to Jesus Christ. So, when we think of the tree of life, when Adam and Eve went into the Garden of Eden, as we read in Genesis chapter 2, the way to the tree of life was completely open. They could have gone to that easily. But once they sinned and partook of the wrong tree, immediately the way to the tree of life was not open anymore. We read in Genesis chapter 3 that, and verse 24, 3:24, he drove the man out of the Garden of Eden, and he stationed the cherubim with a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So what Adam could have gone to without any problem, now he could go only if he went past that sword. And that sword in scripture always symbolizes death. A sword is always a picture of death. What we would today call hanging, something like that. So there was an instrument of death put in front of the tree of life and saying, there's no way to get to this tree of life except through this. And what that means for us today is that that sword, first of all, fell upon Jesus Christ on the cross. Therefore, the way to the tree of life is open. But also for us, that sword has to fall on us, that we take the same way of the cross that Jesus chose. We choose the way of the cross and we enter into life. So in Christ's relationship with me, in order for him to have fellowship with me, there was a cross on which he died. And for me to fellowship with him, there has to be a cross on which I die to my own will. When Jesus lived on this earth, in his relationship with the Father, Jesus had perfect fellowship with the Father, and that is our example. How did he live in perfect fellowship with the Father for 33 and a half years without breaking that fellowship even for a single moment? There was a cross in Jesus' life where he died inwardly for 33 and a half years every single day. And you read that in John chapter 6 and verse 38. Our subject is fellowship. How did Jesus have fellowship with the Father? That is the example for us. John chapter 6 verse 38, Jesus says, I've come down from heaven. Here's the cross. Not to do my own will. That's the cross. The cross is death to my own will, so that I can do the will of my Father. So, he says, I came from heaven only to do that, not to do my own will. So, I call this one sentence the one sentence autobiography of Jesus. Autobiography means when a man writes about his own life. And Jesus is writing about his own 33 and a half years on earth. In one sentence he says, what did I do in 33 and a half years on earth? I never did my own will. I did the will of my Father. Dying on the cross is only one part of it. One part of not doing his own will. You know, in Gethsemane he said, I don't want to go to the cross because it will break my fellowship with you, Father. But not my own will. That is the most difficult cross he ever bore. Break a fellowship with the Father. But throughout his life, he said no to his own will. That was the only way to keep fellowship with the Father. If he ever did his own will, fellowship with the Father would have been broken. Because God created man to do his will. In Revelation chapter 4, it's a song we sing, but I don't know sometimes whether we understand the meaning of it. Revelation chapter 4, you know, Thou art worthy, well-known song. It says here, Revelation 4 verse 11, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, and for you created all things. And in the King James Version it's like this, and for your pleasure they were created. So we were created in order to please God. That's how I understand it. Adam was created to please God. And all human beings from Adam onwards, right up to Jesus Christ, nobody pleased God until Jesus came. And at the end of 30 years, when he was baptized, the Father said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. That's what man was created for, to please the Father. And there was one man who finally did it, Jesus. And if he was not like us, there's no virtue in it. But he was like us, tempted to do his own will every day. You know, when we talk about sin, all sin is essentially doing your own will. What did Eve do in the Garden of Eden? She did her own will. God's will is don't eat of that tree, but my will is I want to eat it. I'm going to do it. Adam did the same thing. He knew that he was not supposed to eat of that tree, but he ate it. So all sin is that. When you get angry, or when you lust after a woman, when you do some unrighteousness with money matters, or any sin, name it, it's always my will. I want to do. I know what God tells me in my conscience, but I'm not going to listen to that. That is sin. And so Jesus never sinned, means he never did his own will. That's how his fellowship with the Father was perfect. So in my fellowship with Jesus too, he has taught us to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth, that is in my life, exactly as it is done in heaven. In heaven, the angels never do their own will. They always do the will of the Father. And I'm praying the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray every day. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in my life exactly as it is done in heaven. What does that mean? It means that I must give up my own will. And that's the meaning of the cross. And I find that there's very little preaching about taking up the cross every day. If you don't believe it, go to YouTube, which has got thousands of sermons, and type in taking up the cross and see how many sermons you find. And if you do find a sermon like that, listen to it and see if they explain what taking up the cross means. Very often, the subject will be that, but they never explain what it means. It shows how the most important thing in the Christian life is almost not taught in Christianity today. And that's the reason for the shallowness. See, it's like a whole lot of children who are not given proper education in a school, and they're always failing in the examinations because the teacher never taught them the most important subjects. And in their examination results come, they're all failing. So this is the most important thing, and I'll tell you why it is the most important thing. Because Jesus said, you cannot follow me if you don't take up the cross every day.